Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something that, honestly, it challenges the very foundation of how we think about free will. This idea that our choices come from a clear, conscious will, that we evaluate things and then we act.
And yet, we all know the feeling. You find yourself in the exact same pattern again, often one you've been actively trying to break.
Right.
So the sources we're digging into today, from reflective humanism, they offer a completely different model, a counter-thesis, really.
Their whole idea is that our inner world isn't governed by a fixed point, like a single moment of judgment. It's about directionality and change.
Exactly. So we're moving from this idea of a fixed conclusion, like, oh, I made a bad choice, to understanding a dynamic trajectory.
A trajectory, I like that.
Yeah. The goal isn't to land on some static, correct answer. It's about recognizing and maybe managing the internal gradient, the actual slope of the hill you're already on.
So the big question we're exploring is, what happens if you sort of prioritize that trajectory over the conclusion? The gradient over the idea of correctness.
It changes everything.
It really does. So let's start with that feeling of repetition. It's universal. If we really have this amazing capacity for free will, why do we keep doing the same thing, that same unhealthy coping mechanism or picking that same argument, even when we know exactly how it ends? I mean, are these decisions actually as free as we think they are?
Well, it certainly doesn't feel free in the moment, does it? It feels more like inertia. You look back and you think, how did that just happen to me again? And this framework suggests that feeling comes from seeing the world in a really binary way. This is a good choice, that's a bad choice. Fixed evaluations.
So we're judging the destination, not paying attention to the road we're on.
Precisely. And when we treat everything like a series of fixed points to be judged, our ability to genuinely evolve, what the sources call the ability to meaningfully change, it just gets stuck. The whole field of generation just sort of solidifies. Our minds get brittle.
So this loop we get stuck in, it's not a moral failing. It's not that I lack willpower. It's a structural problem in how I'm even perceiving the world.
You're treating a moving film like it's a single photograph. And that act of freezing it is what locks the whole system into that repeating loop. I mean, think about the classic, I'm going to start exercising tomorrow. That's an evaluation, a fixed point.
Right.
But then tomorrow comes and the pattern of staying on the couch repeats because the underlying trajectory, the actual structure, was never even looked at.
Which brings us to mood, because that's the big disruptor, isn't it? In our daily lives, we usually treat mood like, I don't know, like background noise.
Yeah.
Or worse, like something you have to suppress, an error in the system that's getting in the way of a rational choice.
And that's where we cut ourselves off from the most important information. We're basically trained to push our mood aside to be logical, but these sources are really clear that mood might be the single strongest driver of what you do next.
Oh, I feel that. That low-grade anxiety you try to ignore all day, and then it just explodes in the evening over something tiny. You think you're being logical by ignoring it, but really you're just bottling it up.
Yes. When you cut mood out, calling it a distraction, you lose all the predictive information that was in it. So we think we're making a free choice, to just step away from a slightly annoying chat. But really, we're just following a path that was already laid out by that signal we ignored. And that's how we get locked into what they call unconscious repetition.
Okay, but hang on. Is this just a new name for emotional bias? How is this different from what standard psychology says about mood?
It's a fundamental shift in definition. It moves away from describing mood by its intensity, how angry or how sad you feel, and toward describing it by its direction.
It's direction.
Yeah, the terminology is crucial here. Mood isn't the feeling of sadness.
It's the math of the movement.
Exactly. Mood is the directionality, the vector. It's the force that's pushing your body and your thoughts toward the very next action. It is the gradient, the slope of your internal landscape. Think of it like you're standing on a hill. The mood isn't the color of the grass, it's the direction and the steepness of the slope right under your feet.
Wow, okay. That changes the whole equation. What happens if you start seeing your mood as a directional force and not just a feeling to be judged?
It finally explains that feeling of being pushed or pulled. You're not just feeling sad. That's a static point, an evaluation. You are feeling a gradient toward isolation, or a trajectory that's heading either toward mindless scrolling or maybe toward calling a friend. The mood is the vector. It's telling you where you're going.
That's why momentum feels so much more powerful than willpower. Once you start leaning one way, the physics of it all just takes over. It's really hard to stop that with just a single conscious thought.
And the sources go even deeper. They talk about when that direction gets set. They say very clearly, decisions are actually formed before our conscious thought even kicks in. The reasons, the explanations, all of that comes later.
That is both terrifying and incredibly relatable. We've all done that. You can explain perfectly why you order the pizza or skip the gym. You have a whole story for it, but you can't actually pinpoint the exact moment you decided. You just remember the story you told yourself after.
The conscious mind is acting like a historian. It's just piecing together a logical story to justify a movement that was already in progress. It's filling in the blanks.
So if my conscious mind isn't making the first move, where does the gradient fit in?
The gradient already narrowed the options for you. If your internal gradient is sloping toward distraction, comfort, your rational mind isn't really choosing from 20 different possibilities. It's only seeing the 5 that already align with that preset trajectory.
I see.
And that meeting point, where the emotional vector sets the direction and the conscious mind comes up with the reason, that's what the sources call interference. It's this dynamic meeting of your internal needs and external reality. The choice is that intersection. It's not pure will, and it's not pure emotion. It's the result of their interference.
So if I'm just using willpower, I'm basically trying to fight a current that's already been set by my inner operating system. That feels like trying to stop a river with your bare hands.
Yeah. And that brings us to the structure of that current, the inner OS. This system organizes all our deep habits, our reactions, into what they call a default loop. We all have a default place we go back to when we're stressed.
And what determines that default? It's the gradient, right?
Sure.
The established slope.
That's it. The sources suggest that the way the system is built, those established gradients, the paths of least internal resistance, they matter a lot more than our stated values. We always go back to our default place because that's where the system is most stable.
Right. So my stated value might be, I want a clean house. But my established gradient, my inner OS setting, is to seek immediate relaxation after a long day. So when I'm stressed, I don't default to my value, I default to the easiest path, the deepest channel in the riverbed.
Exactly. And that means the real work for a learner isn't about changing your values. I mean, everybody wants to be better. The real challenge is gaining the sensitivity to just observe the gradient that's active inside you right now and to see its shape. Is it steep or is it gentle?
And that difference in shape is critical.
It's everything. The framework identifies 2 completely different styles of generating change, and it's based purely on the shape of that gradient. This is the difference between real change and just a painful reaction. The collision gradient versus the query gradient.
Okay, let's start with collision. I think we all know what that feels like.
Oh, yes. The collision gradient is what happens when the internal slope is really steep. The gap between the outside world, what needs to be done, and your internal system, how you feel like moving, it becomes huge, acute. And that massive difference creates a collision. You experience it as pain, friction, heat.
That sounds exactly like burnout. Or being forced into a sudden, painful decision because things have gotten so bad. You know something has to change, but the realization itself is just agonizing.
It forces a huge update, but the system can't actually process that rapid a change. It breaks. It backlashes. And time feels like a sudden jump, a discontinuity, a crisis. You make a forceful change, but it feels completely unsustainable.
So if I slam my fist on the table and say, that's it, I'm never eating sugar again, that forcefulness, that's the collision gradient, and the backlash is me eating an entire cake a week later.
Precisely. That forceful decision, it's driven by shame or a sudden painful insight, and it creates this massive internal friction, this transparent pain between what you're demanding and how your OS is actually built.
Okay, so how does the system change without that collision, without all that friction?
Through the query gradient. This is the slow, gentle, regulated gradient. The recursive process isn't broken, so it allows for a continuous low-friction adjustment. Instead of a hard stop or a sharp pivot, you're allowing for a quiet, continuous course correction.
So the gentler approach uses a question, a query, to allow for that adjustment. Instead of, I must stop this, you ask, what am I actually moving toward when I reach for that? Is there a gentler path I could take right now?
Yes. The question itself acts as a pain minimization device for generating change. The pain we feel is almost always a problem of the gradient's shape. It was too steep, too sudden. It's not usually a problem with the subject itself. It's an issue of internal physics that we misread as a personal failure.
This just completely shifts the paradigm of self-improvement. If you accept this, the goal isn't to control or suppress your mood anymore, which just causes a collision. The goal is just to learn to read it with more sensitivity. That's the practice they call contemplation, observing the act of seeing itself.
Right. Contemplation is just the internal practice of calibrating your stance as an observer. It's not about getting more facts about why you're anxious. It's about clarifying the attitude of knowing, making the whole system transparent to yourself, and accepting that you, as an observer, generate meaning just by interfering with the world.
Meaning that every time you choose to just observe your mood instead of instantly reacting to it, you actually change the mood.
Exactly. How you look at your own inner state is not a neutral act. To observe is to alter. The whole practice is just gaining enough space between that mood vector and your conscious reaction to let a query gradient work instead of forcing a collision.
We've really uncovered a powerful structural shift today. Moving from judging a fixed point, I feel bad, to recognizing a dynamic trajectory, I am moving toward closing myself off.
Mhm.
And the key practice is just holding that observation, reading the slope under your feet.
So we want to leave you with the question that the sources themselves pose. It's built right on this foundation. If you're not trying to control your mood, but just reading its direction, where is your current mood leading you right now?
And can you hold that energy as a trajectory? Something open to a gentle, continuous correction, instead of letting it harden into a fixed point that guarantees a painful collision. Keep that question with you, see what happens.